It is 0203 hours. The sea is a sheet of hammered obsidian, broken only by the invisible wind that combs the top layer into slicks. A PT boat rides the darkness like it stole it. 3 Packards howl in their throttled whisper, hunting just under full song, too loud and they telegraph, too quiet and the hull falls off plane. Spray spits, black water, blacker hulls. The coxswain has salt on his goggles and a stopwatch tucked into the cuff of his glove where he can tap it with one knuckle without letting go of the wheel. Bearing 325, the forward lookout murmurs, not really speaking so much as shaping a number into the wind. Off there, something square against the night, a freighter or a tanker or the blocky profile of a transport trying to be small. The skipper's eyes are 2 red coals under the rim of his helmet. He doesn't announce an attack. He doesn't need to. The boat is already doing it, dropping into a notch in the sea, rising out of it, trimming nose, down a hair as they chase their own wake toward an angle that only makes sense if you've done the math. On the port side, canvas covers are off. 2 torpedoes wink with dull grease where the crewman's rag didn't reach. Safety pins are out. Leads are checked and checked again, because no one wants to learn at speed that a wire has parted under salt and vibration. The torpedoman's mouth is dry. He runs a thumb along the firing lever as if the gesture can smooth fate. Speed, a hair over 40 knots. Not cruising, not screaming, but the place where this hull loves to live a skimming compromise, control without courtesy. At this speed, the boat isn't on the water, it's negotiating with it. The bow proposes. The stern ratifies. Foam signs the treaty in cursive. Angle on the bow? The skipper asks, low. The plotter has been making marks that look like a child's game, but are in fact time made visible. 20 port, comes the answer. Range estimated 1600. The watch officer on the target ship, if he sees them at all, sees a false star twitching on the horizon where a breaking crest catches starlight. The brain is slow at night. Evolution didn't select for convoy officers scanning for planing boats, threading in on a bearing-only solution. The helmsman eases 2 degrees starboard. That's everything. 2 degrees at 40 knots is the difference between a torpedo that arrives alone and one that arrives with friends, in a line, like a string pulled taut across a corridor. The torpedoman watches the stopwatch now. He can feel the closure rate in his teeth. When you've done this enough, your molars become another instrument. There is a smell, gasoline and salt, and the faint ozone of nervous electricity. It is not romantic, it is precise. A sensory equation. 3 engines plus 1 hull plus 4 fish plus 1 bearing equals a claim staked upon a point in the future where a ship will be because you said so. That is the arrogance of a fast shot. That is the craft. Mark! The skipper doesn't shout it. He says it like a prayer that already believes. The lever goes over. The boat shudders the way an animal does when it lets something go that belongs to its own body but is not part of it any longer. The torpedo drops clean and takes the argument of its gyroscope into the sea. A second click, a second departure. Now there are 2 arguments crossing the black. On the freighter, a sailor lights a cigarette under his coat and hunches against the lee rail to shield the ember. The glow writes a tiny circle on his cheekbone. In 40 seconds, the water far astern of him will translate American gasoline and plywood into a pressure wave that writes a different circle, wider, in green water and cast iron. They are already turning away, the PT curling out of its own wake to put distance between itself and the line where the ocean will suddenly flex. Speed makes noise. Speed also makes silence, because distance is the best muffler. Behind them, the explosion that has no words. The crew feels it more than hears it, a tug at the ribs, a pluck at the stern, a harmonic in the guts, and then the sound arrives like a late messenger. What happened in that 40 seconds was not magic, not luck, not daring in the way journalists like to sprinkle that word. It was arithmetic, closure rate, target 12 knots, attacker 40, relative bearing change, 2 degrees at 2,000 yards, torpedo run, just enough to arm, not enough to gift the enemy a mistake. All this on a platform that to the enemy looks like a mosquito until it stings like a shark. The skipper says nothing. He doesn't need to. The boat's wake says it for him, a chalk mark that the sea is already erasing. The crew begins the reset ritual. Leads checked, safeties reinserted for the moment, hands steadied, breath slowed. There may be another run. There usually is. Night is long in these waters, and the math is on their side. We zoom out now, because this channel always does, from salt-on goggles to the ledger. A single wooden hull leveraged American industry into a local advantage, measured not in big ships but in seconds. At 40 knots, shock becomes doctrine. At 40 knots, surprise becomes policy. At 40 knots, a rumor starts in enemy wardrooms that will keep watch officers awake for weeks. They can throw torpedoes at full speed. They don't even slow down to aim. That rumor is the best weapon of all. It travels further than any fish. The moral coda, because we owe one. Speed simplifies decisions. It doesn't make them cleaner. Somewhere in the dark, not every hull hit is a warship. Not every hold is empty of civilians. Not every panic turn avoids a reef where a ship will break up and spill more than cargo. The arithmetic of modern war writes big numbers, with small seconds, and none of those numbers can be unsummed afterward. They throttle up, the bow lifts, 02, 03, becomes 02, 11. The night accepts them again. Let's lay the table, exactly the way your competitor does. Numbers first, adjectives second, conclusions last. The fast shot is a geometry problem solved with gasoline and nerve. You win it in 3 stages: estimate, commit, survive, and each stage has an equation. Suppose the target makes 12 knots on a steady course, a convoy speed ironically chosen because it's safe. 12 knots is 20.7 feet per second. At 2,000 yards, 6,000 feet. A target at that speed needs roughly 290 seconds, just under 5 minutes, to traverse a perpendicular fan of torpedoes. The attacker at 40 knots covers the same 2,000 yards in about 90 seconds. But that's not the real race. The race is between the attacker's need to line up and the target's ability to detect a threat and alter course. If the watch officer has maybe 15 seconds of ambiguous visuals, the false star, the hiss, the intuition that something is wrong, then flips a searchlight that ruins his own night vision, his reaction time stretches. Human eyes at night require adaptation. Human brains require certainty. 40 knots starves both. Angle on the bow, AOB, is the pivot that turns night into math. You don't need a radar mast or a plotting table if you can read a silhouette and count wake angles. AOB 20 degrees port at 2,000 yards with a target at 12 knots means your bearing-only solution doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be good enough to place a fan across the target's likely path. A 2-degree rudder nibble at 40 knots lays that fan not as a guess but as a design. 3 or 4 fish, 50-75 yards apart at intercept. A picket fence the convoy has to run through to live. Most won't. Not because torpedoes never miss, they do, but because the geometry of good enough beats the precision of almost, but late. Now, the torpedo itself. Think in arming distance and gyro angle. Your fish must arm, which means it must run straight for a specified distance before it's alive, and your boat must survive its own launch, which means not turning so violently that you throw the torpedo nose first into the sea the wrong way. At speed, the temptation is to yank the wheel like a getaway driver. At speed, the professional does not. Helm corrections are small 1, 2, 3 degrees, because small corrections at 40 knots are big changes in where 600 pounds of explosive decides to meet steel. Once the lever goes over, survival becomes another equation. Your wake plus their tracers, your silhouette plus their range estimation, your speed minus their coordination. In convoy defense, the weapon is not a gun, it's a drill. Spot, shout, swing, spray. Under stress, drills decay. Guns that are dangerous on paper become noisemakers on water when crews shoot at wakes, at ghosts, at the terrible certainty that something is out there, and they are already late. At 40 knots, tracers look like beads on a necklace that you have no intention of wearing. You treat them as information that mount is awake, and you carve your escape just outside their envelope. Here's why the 40-knot shot feels like cheating to anyone who has only trained for textbook engagements. Everything that normally happens over a minute now happens over seconds. A convoy is a committee that wants to behave like a person. It must resolve uncertainty into action. It must do so with humans who don't want to be the one who turned a ship into a collision. In daylight, commanders will hesitate to order a hard-over swing that risks their neighbor's hull. At night, they hesitate longer. 40 knots weaponizes that hesitation. Fast torpedo doctrine uses a fan because a fan respects uncertainty. You don't pretend you know the target's exact course. You bracket the space where it will most likely be when time meets distance. You place fish at intervals to punish both steady course and the guilty instinct to turn late, hard, and into the danger. Convoy SOP often calls for a turn away from the threat. But what is away when the threat is invisible and already fired? 40 knots scrambles definitions. The fan doesn't care. It exists across both interpretations and collects its due. The stopwatch isn't superstition. It is navigation you can hold in your palm. From mark to splash, the crew is building a private timeline. How many seconds until the first possible intercept given range and the torpedo's run speed? How many seconds before the enemy's first reasonable chance to make a turn that matters? This is where a good skipper earns his myth. He knows the cadence of his own boat, how long it takes to bring the nose 2 degrees, how the third engine feels when it's exactly where it should be, how the bow rides in small chop versus a long swell. He treats seconds as tools. He cuts with them. Speed is not an attribute, it's an architecture. It dictates crew choreography. It writes your checklists in grease, pencil, and sweat. It says, if you are not ready by the time the bow points 3 degrees starboard after that second swell, you are not ready at all. It says, your conversation must be numbers. It says, your courage should look like discipline, not like shouting. Critics of fast shot doctrine occasionally argue that speed introduces error, that estimation at 40 knots invites torpedo waste and hits the water like a coin toss. That would be true if the decision remained a single bet. It doesn't. In a night of operations, 4 boats can make 8 fast runs. They are not playing a single coin toss. They're playing a series, and the math of series rewards the side that converts seconds into multiple independent attempts, while the other side converts confusion into a single late decision. You win with repetition. You win with bracketing. You win with the simple, horrible arithmetic of more chances under better geometry. A fan that punishes both steady course and panic turn also punishes the ship that doesn't belong in that procession. Fast shots are honest about one thing. They simplify the world into silhouettes and speeds. Everything's slower than that. Everything's softer than that. Everything that rides the same water but does not deserve the same fate lives under the same night. The professional's job is to make the fan as small as it can be and still work. The criminal's job is to make it as large as he can and claim success. Doctrine cannot teach conscience, but it can constrain its theatre. Fast shots at 40 knots are not magic. They are 1, seconds harvested, 2, degrees respected, 3, distances bracketed. That is all. That is enough. Your competitor loves systems. So do we. The PT at speed is not 3 engines glued to a canoe. It is a choreographed interlock of wood, metal, electricity, and muscle, where every part exists to keep a promise. If you point the bow here, right now, you can throw steel exactly there, right then, and live to do it again. A planing hull cheats displacement. Below 20 knots, a boat negotiates with water by pushing it aside. Above 35, it bargains by skimming riding lift created as the hull presents a flat, fast surface to the water. That lift is fickle. It loves smooth bottoms, balanced loads, and trim that keeps the bow cutting just high enough to ride over small chop, but low enough to keep the propellers happy. You feel it when it's right. The wheel loosens. The hum of the Packards tightens into a single tone that feels like focus. At speed, hull flex becomes a kind of language. The structure talks back. Too much fuel forward, and the bow bites and throws spray into your face. Too much aft, and the stern wallows and steals acceleration. Crew learn to trim by eye and by ankle. They know where the hammer hits the nail plate under the forward hatch and what it means when it rings dull instead of sharp. Precision lives in little superstitions that are actually diagnostics. Launching at speed is a problem of forces. Early tube. Systems offer sexy silhouettes and neatness, but suffer under the stress of a hull that is constantly changing the angle of its own deck relative to the sea. Enter roll-off racks and deck mounts, crude to look at, elegant in purpose. They remove complexity where the boat can't afford it and add redundancy where the crew demands it. The firing circuit is the sacred thing, so simple you can trace it with a finger in a blackout. So safe that the last thing standing between intent and steel is a human choosing to complete a circuit. That click matters. On a PT, the sound of a firing lever going home is the purest note in the orchestra. It's not loud, it's consequential. In training, crews rehearse the path of that lever until the muscle memory is a prophecy. Hands know where to be before the brain shouts at them to go. A torpedo is a promise tied around an engine and a brain that knows only straight lines bent by a gyro. At speed, the boat must deliver that promise into water that is already moving violently under the hull. That means launch attitude matters. Roll and pitch tolerances are not theoretical, they're survival. Too much roll at release, and the fish enters the water at a yaw angle that steals precious arming distance or, in the worst case, destabilizes into a porpoise path that writes failure in big letters. That's why the helm corrections before launch are measured like prescriptions, 1 degree here to square the deck to the sea, then deliver steel with a water entry that is clean, true, and quickly alive. 3 engines are not faster than 2, they are options. The middle engine at partial throttle is a metronome. The outboards carry the planing load. If you yank all 3 open at once, you don't go faster, you lose finesse. Skilled skippers keep a finger on the middle throttle the way a conductor rests the baton. Hovering, ready, aware that a breath of adjustment there makes the entire hull sing or stumble. Mechanics, tune those Packards like they're stringed instruments, valve lash clearances set by feel, plugs replaced before they insist upon it, magnetos coaxed to reliability by rituals that outsiders call superstition and insiders call experience. Nothing is romantic about a dead switch at 40 knots. Wiring on a PT is a compromise between marine ruggedness and battlefield expediency. The crew respects it like they respect a good pistol. Clean, dry, known. Safety pins are a theology. They're either in or out. They're never sort of. Before a run, the boat becomes a ceremony of safeties removed and circuits armed. Each step spoken quietly, each step echoed back, because echoes catch mistakes. After a run or after anything that smells like chaos, safeties go back in, checks are rerun, and nobody rolls over to light a cigarette until the boat itself tells them she is back inside her own margins. At 40 knots, extra motion is a tax. Every human has a lane. The helmsman owns the next 2 degrees, the torpedoman owns the next 2 seconds, the skipper owns the next 2 decisions, the deckhand owns the next 2 safeties, the plotter owns the next 2 marks. That's how a PT runs when it runs right, like a sentence where every word is the one you meant and none of them are wasted. Crew talk in numbers because numbers make sense when the wind steals vowels. 2 port, mark, 3 to 5, ready 1, ready 2. It is music, but not for listening, for doing. You don't get a 40-knot shot if you didn't pay for it the previous afternoon with fuel filters, plug changes, and a crawl along the stringers checking for hairline splits where stress likes to hide. The romance of night battle is subsidized by grease under fingernails and the dull ache of men who spent 2 hours lying on planks tightening hose clamps by feel. Good enough. On maintenance is a debt that comes due precisely when you need grace. Professional crews refuse to borrow from the platers, future. They underwrite it. To an IJN watch officer trained to think of torpedo attack as an approach to slowing ritual, the PT's system reads as a lie. Boats are not supposed to throw heavy weapons while planing. They're not supposed to keep control through the launch and then disappear into their own speed. But the PT's whole organism exists to make that lie true. Hull form, engine tuning, firing circuits, crew lanes, and the mathematics of fans, each piece alone is only intriguing. Together, they erase the pauses the enemy expects. Surprise is born not from novelty, but from the removal of friction at the exact moment the opponent needs you to be clumsy. The system works because it is honest about what it can't do. A PT cannot soak damage. It cannot slug with cruisers. It cannot spend minutes on a perfect solution. So it does not try. It spends seconds on a good one and leaves. Wooden hull, metal nerve, human rhythm, that's the whole machine. Doctrines are stories armies tell themselves about how the next 5 minutes will go. Night doctrine makes those stories bolder because darkness flatters conviction. In the Western Pacific, 2 stories collided. The Imperial Japanese Navy believed it owned the black hours trained in night optics, disciplined in silent maneuver, deadly in destroyer torpedo doctrine. The Americans brought something smaller, cruder, faster. Plywood that planned, engines that sang, and a habit of turning seconds into victories. The clash wasn't about who loved the night more. It was about who understood how time behaves within it. Pre-war, IJN training made a religion of night fighting. Lookouts were specialists, not assignments. Destroyers drilled in coordinated torpedo salvos, using weapons that earned fear and capital letters. Searchlights were not merely tools, they were punctuation flashes that froze the enemy into silhouettes that gunnery could then annotate. Convoys, when escorted properly, were supposed to sit under overlapping arcs of awareness. The story said, "If something comes, we will see it. If we see it, we will shape it. If we shape it, we will kill it." The US small craft doctrine didn't try to unwrite that story. It tried to vandalize it in the margins. PT squadrons were not destroyer packs. They were harassment theology made real. Force the enemy to choose between the certainty of one threat and the possibility of another. You can't keep searchlights on all night. You can't traverse guns at targets you haven't found. You can't make all convoys travel like destroyer flotillas. So PT doctrine leaned into the seams approach low, stay fast, attack with bearing-only solutions, and vanish before the committee can fix blame and turn it into orders. The IJN watch officer expects MTBs to nip and run with guns. In his mental model, a small boat does not carry a heavyweight problem unless it telegraphs the intention. Slow to set up, waggle for alignment, make a spectacle that invites tracers. Against that film, the PT writes an edit. No waggle, no slow, no spectacle. The torpedo release happens inside the quiet part of the night, before storyboards and after doctrine. By the time the convoy begins its away turn, it is doing what the PT's fan was built to punish. The human eye at night is a treacherous partner. Illuminate the world, and you reveal the world and ruin your own adaptation. A searchlight at the wrong moment helps the attacker more than the defender. A PT beyond the main cone sees the light paint the crests and reads the convoy's skeleton as if daylight came in bones. Under 40 knots, those bones give you the rhythm of escorts, the position of the sheepdog relative to the sheep, and the gap where your fan will count. Worse, the light becomes a target for your enemy's fear. Guns shoot at brightness, not at boats. Doctrine intended the light as a scalpel. At speed, it plays like a flare over a panic ward. Turn away, the book says. But which way is away when you cannot see the invisible fence just laid for you? If the threat came from port, maybe starboard is safety unless the torpedoes were fanned to the side you will swing into. The PT doctrine counts on this, that a convoy is a chorus trying to become a soloist, and that the time it takes to do so is longer than the 90 seconds the attacker needs to make mutation into history. Destroyers, trained for offensive night torpedo attacks, are decisive. Convoy escorts, trained to be shepherds, are cautious. Caution at night looks like delay. Delay at 40 knots looks like surrender. Japanese radio discipline is famous, and with reason. Silence preserves surprise in offensive action. But defense wants a different music. Short, fast, secure bursts that propagate comprehension quicker than fear. A PT attack corrupts that discipline. A voice that has said nothing for an hour now says everything at once, in panic, impartial, with bearings that may be wrong by just enough to spoil coordination. American doctrine accepts loose edges here. PT crews talk numbers into the wind because speed turns full sentences into liabilities. 2,000, 2 fish, 3 to 5, away. Their doctrine is thin but fast. Thin but fast beats thick but late. There's a particular psychology to being hit by a weapon you didn't see launched. Guns announce themselves. Shells speak in flight. Searchlights argue. Torpedoes launched at 40 knots behind a minimal signature feel like the sea itself betrayed you. This is doctrinal, not just emotional. If your plan for the night leans on spotting the setup, and you never see a setup, you begin to distrust the night. Once distrust enters a crew, night becomes something to endure, not to master. That is strategic rot delivered in tactical bottles. Here's the part your competitor sometimes buries, and we will pull forward. None of this doctrinal success happens without spares, fuel, and training hours that let crews rehearse the seconds until they're bored of them. Night confidence grows where engines start on command, and where broken parts are replaced by Tuesday, not when available. Japanese convoy doctrine improvised under grinding pressure, often married excellent destroyer skills with poor merchant, crew training, and thin maintenance backstops. The PTs fed on abundance of gasoline, of plugs, of practice, and turned it into a style of fight, aggressive humility. We will not do a lot. We will do a little perfectly, and again. Doctrine is a machine for decision under uncertainty. It protects the innocent when it works and injures them when it doesn't. A convoy that panics turns wide and risks collision. A convoy that freezes risks being patterned by a fan. The PT's job is to create that panic or that freeze, and then leave before either becomes a moral spectacle. Professionals know this, and some hate it. The best nights feel like theft, not battle. Yet theft is the point. You are stealing time. You are stealing certainty. You are stealing the enemy's right to understand what is happening while it still matters. Night doctrine favored the side that made seconds expensive. The IJN trained to bend darkness toward decisive destroyer actions. The PTs trained to bend it toward indecision among escorts. 40 knots was not just speed, it was leverage. With it, plywood trumped pedigree, small crews out-argued big formations, and the rumor mill did the last mile of damage. They don't slow down. Once that sentence gets into a wardroom, doctrine must rewrite itself or live with the fear. Many nights it did the latter. The skipper doesn't decide to attack, so much as he steps into an envelope, an invisible tunnel made of speed, angles, arming distances, and human coordination, and then refuses to step out of it until the fish are away. Everything inside that tunnel is measured. Everything outside it is danger, disguised as choice. Helm owns the next 2 degrees of bow. He's reading pitch and roll through his knees and hands, not his eyes. Eyes lie at night, knees don't. His job is to square the deck to the sea at the instant of launch so the fish enter clean. Torpedoman, TTM, owns the next 2 seconds. He lives in the firing circuit, safeties, and a practiced lever throw that's the same at 12 knots or 40. His world is a switch and the consequences of getting it wrong. Skipper owns the next 2 decisions. Commit and break. He translates a pencil plot and a silhouette into an order the boat can obey without discussion. Plotter divided by observer owns the next 2 marks. He doesn't chase perfect range. He chases trend. If his marks are drifting, he calls it. If they're stable, he shuts up and lets the geometry work. Engineer owns the next 2 heartbeats from the engines. Does the middle throttle give you bite or mush? Are temps where they should be? Is there a cough that's about to become a failure at the worst moment? If anyone reaches beyond his lane inside the envelope, the boat clutters. Clutter is drag. and drag eats seconds. At 40 knots, a 1-degree correction is a sentence. 3 degrees is a paragraph. The helm writes in letters so small you'd miss them if you weren't watching the wake open and close like a zipper. Too much rudder, and you throw lateral G into the deck. Throw lateral G into the deck, and you risk an ugly water entry for the torpedo skitter, porpoise, or a nose slap that steals arming distance. The professional helmsman knows the boat's elastic limits, how much the bow will answer after he's already eased the wheel back. Over. Control is inexperience, shout, talking. Good hands whisper and let the hull finish its own sentence. Wide open throttle looks heroic, but heroes porpoise. The center engine is the metronome, slight rises to carry the bow over a short chop without slamming, slight sinks when the nose rides too high and steals prop bite. This is choreography, not horsepower. You want a launch platform, not a Bronco. The engines are not there to impress. They're there to present a level deck for exactly 2 heartbeats when Mark leaves the skipper's mouth. Every fish has an arming run. At night, that number is your religion. You do not launch inside it. You do not get away with shaving it. You do not bet your crew on the hope that luck will arm a weapon that doctrine says is still asleep. The envelope is a living thing, and arming distance is one of its bones. If the target is inside that bone, you widen now 2-degree nibble, throttle breath, and you take the shot you can live with. Close is wonderful for guns. It is poison for torpedoes that haven't woken up. Novices think the attack ends at fish away. Professionals think it begins there. The escape turn must begin on a deck that is still your deck. If you've launched at the exact point where you must also yank hard over to live, you've written your own obituary in the wake. A good skipper has pre-positioned a corridor his own invisible lane, so he can lay the fan, count to 1, 2, then carve his exit across a seam in the convoy's arcs of fire. The first tracer string is a diagnostic, not a threat. That mounts a wake at X bearing. Your turn happens just outside its useful range. One fish is a letter. A laddered spread is a paragraph. It brackets uncertainty. If the target holds course, center fish collect. If it drifts 5 degrees, inner fish argue the case. If panic throws the wheel, outer fish are waiting where fear drives them. Spacing is not arbitrary. You're planning where the fan will be, not at the bow, but at the intercept. 50-75 yards between centers at 2,000 yards gives you a fence with slats close enough that a ship at 12 knots can't thread them during its own reaction lag. Any skipper can sling 4 torpedoes. The craftsman makes them a geometry. The enemy will enter without knowing when he decided to. Angle on the bow 2 to 0 port. That's your first link. It tells you you're not yet inside the target's comfortable response because he still presents a sliver, not a full beam. Range 1600. Next link. Arming distance is satisfied if you launch in the next 10 seconds. Ready 1. Ready 2. Link 3. The circuit is real. Mark. The lever moves. 1 1000. 2 1000. Helm. 2 degrees to your escape heading. Engines. Breathe. Skipper. Shut up. At that point, silence is part of the envelope. Words are drag, and drag is death. Before the run, the boat walked through a ritual that looks like superstition until you connect it to speed. Safety pins out and accounted. Firing circuit continuity confirmed. Gyro settings double-touched. Engineer's hand on the middle throttle. Plotter's pencil fresh. Goggles clean. Salt spray scratches, lenses and scratches, steel targets. You do it the same way each time because sameness creates speed. In the envelope, novelty is noise. The envelope is not mystical. It's a sliver where variables behave for you. The sea isn't throwing a cross swell into your deck. The wind is on your quarter, not your nose. The moon is behind the target, making him a darker dark. Your wake, when you look back, is a tight white rope, not a ragged banner. When those things line up, you attack as if you were expected. When they don't, you either manufacture the alignment with 2 degrees and 2 seconds, or you live to attack later. 40 knots isn't bravado. It's an envelope you earn with maintenance, rehearsal, and men who understand their lane. Stumble outside it, and speed is only a louder way to be wrong. Stay inside it, and plywood throws steel exactly where arithmetic told it to, and then leaves the scene before anyone can hold a meeting about it. The hinge. Speed simplifies choices. It also amplifies mistakes. The difference is discipline. The enemy had counters. The ocean ate most of them. The rest were sabotaged by human limits, reaction time, night vision, coordination. What looks like defense in depth on a diagram becomes defense in noise at 2 in the morning when a 30-ton mosquito draws a chalk line across your convoy's future. The theory is clean. Flood the night, carve a silhouette, feed guns. The practice at 40 knots is a self-own. A light paints the chop, not the attacker. It gifts the PT a ghost map of masts and funnels and escorts without asking anything in return. Worse, the act of switching it on steals the crew's scotopic vision. After the first 30 seconds of glare, the watch officer can't read the dark between the cones anymore. The PT, already outside the brightest center, uses the edge glow as a ruler. There's the lead escort, there's the fat merchant, there's the gap. Thank you, the C says. Next, pulled too early, they reveal nothing except that you are nervous. Pulled late, they illuminate the aftermath. White water where something used to be, a boil at the edge of light where you guessed the attacker was. The PT learns as much from your illumination as you do. He reads your fear in where you choose to light and how long you keep it there. He slides his exit arc into the places you're not sure enough to stare at. A gun crew under stress aims at brightness or noise. A planing boat gives them neither for long. Tracers create lines you can dodge. Splashes create ranges you can borrow. The PT treats each burst like echolocation information about mounts, crews, and traverse limits. At 40 knots, you don't beat bullets. You beat their instruction set. Human tracking with a lag. The wake is a liar you hire. Swing it wide right to sell a turn, then carve left across your own foam. People shoot at wakes because wakes are something, and something at night is a gift. Convoy doctrine often defaults to a simple binary. Turn A, say away from, the threat, or B, toward it, on command. Each is safe on paper. At 12 knots, each is late in life. A laddered fan expects both. A threads the outer slats. B runs into the inner. Only an immediate hard-over with prescient knowledge of where the fence actually is will consistently save a target, and that prescience is exactly what the attacker has denied you by firing before declaring himself. The spreadsheet says, reduce exposure by X%. The night says, choose the slat you prefer. Listening devices want cavitation signatures and steady approaches. A PT gives you a chaos of sound for a moment and then distance. Sonar wants a submerged target with persistence. A wooden hull skipping the surface like a devil stone throws back nonsense. In the lab, filters can tease meaning from mess. In a midnight wheelhouse, filters are a luxury you don't have because the first boom is a minute away, and the only instrument that matters is the one between your ears, and it wants sleep, not calculus. Early sets loved big steel and consistent closing. They feared islands of sea return, squalls, and fast toys. A PT slaloming at the fringe of range is a mayfly. Now you see it. Now you don't. The picture stabilizes just as the fan is already in the water. Then the display becomes a primate problem. Which blip is guilt, which is foam, which is your own escort turning to shoot at a ghost? Decision delay lives here 30 seconds of confirm before we commit, while a wooden hull converts those seconds into yards. Laid smart, smoke can make a convoy disappear from itself. The attacker appreciates this. In fog and smoke, escorts hesitate to fire across the herd. Hesitation is hospitality to a boat that only needs a corridor 100 yards wide to deposit trouble and then cut a white scar out the far side. Smoke saves you from artillery. It saves little from a weapon already fired. Now and then an escort tries to swat the mosquito. Courage isn't. The problem, physics is. The ramming run is a straightened thought in a crooked world. The PT watches you straighten, and writes a curve that carries him across your bow's future without ever becoming your present. Even if you close, the risk trades one threat for three: collision damage to the escort, disrupted convoy spacing, and guns that now point into your own lanes. The attacker thanks you for the noise and leaves you to organize it. Add mounts, add barrels, add confidence. But firepower is a multiplier, not an originator. It multiplies sense-making, not replaces it. If the inputs are late and the picture is wrong, more only makes louder mistakes. PT doctrine counts on that, the psychological need to do something, anything, at volume. Every second your convoy is a symphony of panic, is a second the attacker writes his exit without interference. The average human at night needs a handful of seconds to see, decide, and signal. At 40 knots, those seconds are not available as a lump sum. They arrive as pennies scattered across the deck while the thief picks up dollars. Train harder, yes. Drill until reaction shortens, yes. But there is a flaw beneath which biology refuses to go. PT crews learned to live right above it. Convoy defenses often pretended they didn't have to. The counters weren't stupid. They were late. Late is another word for lost, when a boat treats seconds as capital and invests them with discipline. The hinge. The defender's job is to slow the world back down to human speed. The attacker's job is to keep it fast. In those nights, speed won the vote. This channel loves the factory footprint chapter, the part where the foggy night and the salt-glossed goggles owe their existence to concrete floors, parts, bins, and men in coveralls who never saw a tracer. We'll do it cleaner and more explicit. The PT's deadliest weapon wasn't the torpedo. It was the supply chain that made repeated, disciplined seconds possible. PT's hull isn't poetry. It's laminated practicality layers of wood, laid on diagonal, to produce a structure that is light, stiff enough, easy to repair with ordinary skills, and forgiving when pushed to 40 knots over and over. Damage control on such a hull is less welding ballet and more carpenter's math. Scarf a patch, clamp, glue, screw, sand back on the line. Steel is forever. Plywood is tonight. Tonight matters. High-octane gasoline, finicky superchargers, magnetos that like attention, those Packards are a love language. Squadrons that worshipped preventative maintenance had boats that rose onto plane when asked, which meant skippers could demand now and get now, not give me a second. Industry supplied the most sacred thing of all, spares on the shelf. A blown plug wire at noon is a miss at midnight if the crate isn't there. With crates, swap replaces hope. Logistics wins by making the abnormal normal. Common filters, common plugs, common belts, the difference between rummaging and reaching. Tools staged where hands know them by feel. Paperwork that makes the right box arrive without a speech. The myth of improvisation is glamorous. The reality of interchangeability is lethal. You cannot run a 40-knot envelope unless your afternoon looks boring. Anything that requires a calendar is the enemy of a night boat. Overhaul schedules that land before failure, not after. A discipline of swapping suspect subsystems wholesale rather than chasing gremlins through night after night. The depot is the fourth engine, invisible, patient, always turning a handle so the boat can keep singing without clearing its throat. A crew that says 2 degrees and means the same thing from coxswain to skipper is not an accident. That fluency is manufactured. Drills till bored is not a cliché, it's a method. Chalkboard math of AOB, fan spacing on the classroom wall, practice runs on docile seas before the angry ones, engineers who can strip and reassemble carburetors blindfolded, not because it's cute, but because a blackout during a fight is not the time to be precious. You buy that competence with hours, fuel, and instructors. Industry makes those hours exist. 40 knots, drinks. The only reason doctrine can prescribe speed as structure is because someone ashore is stacking cans like cathedral bricks. Logistics officers who make the delivery boringly on time are the reason a skipper can choose the envelope instead of nursing a gauge and pretending to be bold. In war, fuel isn't a liquid. It's an argument that ends with yes. Crews who believe the next mission will be flown with a healthy boat behave differently than crews who believe they're gambling on mercy. A sealed box with the right part is a poem. Someone thought of you before you needed it. That belief makes men fastidious. Fastidiousness makes boats reliable. Reliability makes doctrine fearless. Perfection is expensive in the wrong direction. You don't need aerospace tolerances to throw steel into a shipping lane at night. You need repeatable adequacy and rapid repair. Wood, gasoline engines, simple wiring, straightforward firing circuits, each looks cheap on a brochure and murderous in a straight. The industrial miracle isn't a golden machine. It's 1,000 ordinary ones at the right place, time and standard. The enemy needs you to pause, so rumor can bleed away. Industry denies him the pause. Boats sortie again and again and again, because downtime is short, because the engine that sounded a little off is taken off, because the tube that gave a tech a bad feeling is replaced, not argued with. That tempo teaches the enemy hopelessness. He can steel himself for an occasional raid. He cannot pray away a pattern. Wooden killers are not magic. They're the cardboard boxes behind them. The hinge. If you starve an exquisite weapon, it becomes a story. If you feed an ordinary one, it becomes doctrine. The PT was ordinary in the right ways and fed in the right quantities. The result was extraordinary at exactly the moment the stopwatch asked for it. Electrons help, humans decide. The PT's night brain is a composite, a small radar picture that lies just enough to demand humility, a radio vocabulary built for speed, and a set of eyeballs that learn to turn wakes and wind into math. This chapter is the triad machine cue, voice cue, human cue, and how they braid into a 40-knot shot. Small set radar at sea level is a rumor mill. It tells you there's something dark beyond the dark and sometimes even where. It hates squalls, loves metal, and disappears small craft when the sea stands up. The disciplined crew uses it as a hint to start a human search pattern, not as a verdict. You hear a blip on the fringe bearing 320. You slide your gaze there and look for the non-wave, the rectangular persistence that isn't whitecap flicker. You don't argue with the scope when it's vague. You thank it for the nudge and go back to the real instruments. Eyes and seconds. The channel you're imitating hates wasted syllables. So does the boat. Comms are brevity code, not conversation. Contact 325. Est convoy. Speed 1 to 2. That sentence is a jewel because it hands off a fight without noblesse, no adjectives, no theatre. Inside the attack, the voices go thinner still. AOB 2 to 0 port. Range 16. Ready 1, ready 2. Mark. If you transcribe it later, it looks like a telegram from a calculator. Good. Radios should sound like instruments when speed is the conductor. Lookouts at night are not watchers, they're measurers. They count beat frequency in the sparkle of a wake. A slow heave is a heavy ship. A tight, nervous trail is a destroyer's pert bow. They taste wind direction on the lip and know whether their own exhaust will betray them if they counter-turn. They scan for the absence of stars at a low horizon where a hull's shoulder blocks a patch of sky. They don't get excited about a single clue. They stack small certainties into enough. A radar range is a comfort when it's real. At night, you often don't get that candy. You work off bearings steady, opening, closing. If a bearing holds while the silhouette fattens, you are crossing fate with intent. The plotter's pencil puts ticks on paper at timed intervals. You don't pretend it's exact. You ask a simpler question, is this stable? Stability is consent. You take it. Throw a fan where consent predicts the body will be, and leave before anyone can sue. You could keep the stopwatch in your head. You shouldn't. Voices that count make thoughts communal. 10, 20, 30. The torpedoman hears it and tunes his hand. The helm hears it and resists panic. The skipper hears it and knows how much longer he can ask the sea to hold the deck flat. Counting is discipline, you can hear. A sliver moon behind the target is a blessing. Ahead of you, it's a betrayal. Thin cloud is camouflage until a searchlight bounces off it and writes your position into the sky. Then it's a liability you dodge by angle, not distance. Tides push wakes in patterns. If the convoy is running with a cross current, you'll see an odd slant to its disturbance. The human sensor reads it and corrects 2 degrees without paperwork. The loudest enemy of night fight isn't the other side. It's your own imagination. You silence it with ritual, checklists, repeated phrases, hand on lever pauses. The brain wants to fill the dark with stories. The crew insists on numbers instead. The result is a boat that doesn't invent attackers or conjure periscopes out of whitecaps. It invents geometry and conjures reality out of quiet. There will be nights when the set paints ghosts, the radio is a hiss, and the lookout's voice thins with fatigue. Doctrine saves you here. You don't move the envelope to match your wish. If inputs are weak, you choose a more conservative fan. Widen early. Give yourself a thicker exit, and accept fewer stories to tell in the morning in exchange for more mornings to tell them. Squadron work shines when every hull speaks the same dialect. One boat cues the others with bearings and adjectives like fat or tall banned by habit. A second boat plays wing with a slightly offset course to produce crossing fans. A third hangs back as the eye, ready to relay and not to freelance. This is humility as tactics. Nobody tries to be the movie hero because the doctrine is the hero, and speed will reward the team that stays boring longest. The best squadrons carry the night into the day without romance. They speak about seconds missed and degrees squandered as if they were dropped tools, not sins. I chased perfect and lost the envelope. I walked the throttle when I should have breathed it. I didn't count out loud and the deck got loud. These sentences load into the next crew's radiogramma. The human sensor becomes a community project. Next time they are earlier, quieter, better. Electrons open the door, voices carry you through, eyes keep you honest. Strip anyone away and a 40-knot shot becomes a wish. Keep all 3 in harness and plywood manifests arithmetic at range, while the other side tries to convince its own biology to keep up. The hinge. Tools don't make speed. Discipline does. Tools fail gracefully when discipline is already in the boat. Fights at night feel slow to frightened people and fast to prepared ones. To a PT crew inside the envelope, the kill chain is not a metaphor. It is a clock face you can lay on the sea. It begins as a rumor, an ambiguous radar tick at the fringe of range, or a silhouette that is more rectangle than wave, or a wake that persists where the rest of the water is busy. No one says convoy yet. The observer shapes a bearing into the foment, wind 325, and the boat accepts that number as a key that fits every lock aboard. The plotter ticks time into marks 10 seconds apart and watches for stability. A bearing that holds while the shape fattens is consent. The skipper trims the bow by a degree and asks the engines for poise rather than drama, because a level deck later is worth more than theatrics now. Then comes the first real fork. Commit or abort is not an emotional question. It is a small ledger of sea state against arming distance, escort spacing against exit room, the boat's health against the crew's appetite. A quiet commit settles the matter. Aborting would carry no shame. It is only the other half of discipline. Tonight the conditions say yes. The vector is a pair of degrees of starboard. The helmsman lays on like a craftsman, not a hero. And in that tiny motion the future shape of a torpedo fan becomes inevitable. The torpedoman lets his hand drift near the firing lever and then holds still, because nerves are drag, and drag is bankruptcy. Checklists collapse into motion without calling attention to themselves. Safety's out and accounted for. Firing circuit confirmed by touch as much as by eye. Gyro settings each read and echoed as if numbers were prayers. Range falls into the window, where arming distance will be honoured if the fish are delivered in the next 12 to 15 seconds. Angle on the bow stabilises at 20 port, the single phrase every fast-shot skipper loves, because it says the target presents enough broadside that a fan will cut across its future, no matter which school solution the convoy chooses. On the transport, someone senses a wrongness and reaches for a searchlight or a phone. But human reaction needs seconds the attacking boat has already harvested. Launch begins inside the narrowest room in the house. The helm squares the deck to the sea with a shallow correction. The engines hold a metronome you can feel through your shins, and the torpedoman's fingertip settles against the switchguard without fuss. The skipper says, "Mark," in a voice so calm it feels like a measuring instrument. The lever clicks. The hull gives a living shudder as something that belonged to it and is no longer part of it goes to make an argument in black water. The second mark follows a heartbeat later, and now the sea contains a grammar no one can see. Escape begins before the explosion. The helm carries 2 degrees into the exit, as if the turn were already decided, which, if you've rehearsed, it was. The engineer feeds the center throttle just enough to keep the bow from hobby-horsing the deck into error. The boat is leaving the crime while the evidence is still in flight. Only now do the defenders light the world. A searchlight wakes the sky and draws the convoy's skeleton in pale chalk, and gun crews write necklaces of tracer that the PT reads as street signs. This mount is awake, those turrets sleep, this escort turns too aggressively for his own good. The first intercept becomes possible at roughly the second the crew's bones say it should. When the boom arrives, you feel it tug at the stern and pluck the ribs before you hear it. And even then you don't linger to narrate. The worst exits happen after success. A professional rides the plan, not the adrenaline, and keeps carving white chalk on the water until the geometry says the angry arcs are behind him. Only then does speech return. And even that speech sounds like logistics. 2 fish away, 1 possible, exiting south. Reconstitution is an art of quiet wrists. The torpedoman parks the lever guard, snaps safeties home, and runs the same fingertip test backward. The plotter lines a thin pencil through the boat's wake, not for romance but to locate the return turn that will arrive 10 minutes from now, when the fuel figure forces the choice between prudence and one more cut. The engineer listens to the center engine's note with the suspicion of a doctor, checking a pulse after a sprint. He hears nothing he doesn't like, which is exactly what he was trained to hear. The skipper glances, not at the horizon. The horizon is noise, but at his men. Eyes are steady. Hands are where they ought to be. The boat has returned to the baseline that lets seconds be spent, not leaked. If the escort pack devolves into a chase, the PT will not oblige. The doctrine is not run faster than their anger. It is exit earlier than their organization. There is a difference. You can outrun a ship now and then. You can always outpace a committee. The kill chain has a second life after the blast, call it the audit. 90 seconds bought the hit or the miss, but the next 9 minutes buy future hits. Voice discipline on the net becomes the archive. Effect probable. Boil at 1 to 8. Escort bearing 290 separated convoy light discipline broken. These phrases are not victory laps. They are notes. Your friend 1 mile south will cash in 5 minutes from now when he needs a lane to lay his own fan and wants to know which searchlight is being run by a brave fool. The slowest part of the kill chain is how long it takes doctrine to drift from one wardroom to another. The PT's job is to keep the water churned until that drift deposits fear where you want it. In the man who will hesitate tomorrow. The point of 90 seconds is that it compresses war to human scale while denying the enemy the same courtesy. Decision cycles are currencies. You hoard yours, you counterfeit his. If you stage the scene properly, the convoy spends its seconds on illumination and noise while you spend yours on geometry and silence. That asymmetry is not a flourish, it is the thesis. A boat that treats time like a material can build structures inside it. A boat that treats time like a mood drowns in it. The difference is the stopwatch you can hear without looking, and the voice that says mark as if it was saying breathe. Sometimes the sea says no, and sometimes you say yes too soon, and sometimes physics presents a bill stamped due immediately. Failure does not discredit the doctrine, it completes it, provided you survive, and let humility do its work. The commonest failures announce themselves with texture. A porpoising entry is not a mystery. You feel it as a torpedo slaps the surface and begins an ugly up-down oscillation that steals distance and threatens accuracy. It is born from over-ruddered launch, from a bow pitching at the instant of release, from a degree of roll the helmsman failed to tame. The cure in the moment is brutal simplicity. Accept the fish as lost and set up the next one clean. Do not compound error by rushing a second launch on a crooked deck. The cure in daylight is repetition without romance, helm drills that teach micro-corrections, throttle choreography that flattens the deck for exactly 2 heartbeats, mock launches in chop until the hull learns to hold still when it matters. Duds and late arming wound morale precisely because they happen after everyone has done everything right. That is why the arming number is religion. No crew can command fuses, but every crew can honor distance. The temptation to sneak in closer dresses like daring and performs like malpractice. Wrong gyro settings are less fate than sloppiness. Redundancy saves lives here. The torpedoman points and says every digit aloud. The skipper repeats them back as if he distrusts the man rather than the darkness, and together they reduce the universe of avoidable error. The most seductive failure is the one your audience cheers and professionals loathe, chasing perfect. When a skipper pirouettes to stage a cinema-beautiful beam shot, wind and wake silently reclaim the seconds he has stolen from discipline. Good geometry now beats perfect geometry later. The sentence crews hate most writing in their after-action notes. Lost the envelope to pride, hurts once and saves lives 3 times. Exits fail more often after success than after failure. The moment a hit is likely, a boat that should already be leaving lingers to confirm what the ocean has already certified. That hesitation slides the hull back across arcs of fire. The plan was meant to miss and swaps certainty for vulnerability. Doctrine prescribes boredom at exactly the point the bloodstream begs for narration. Count to 2. Turn to the heading you briefed 2 hours earlier, and save your adjectives for the pier. Coordination failures between boats are another quiet killer. Overlapping fans waste weapons and flirt with friendly collision. They also speak to a radiogrammer that is too clever by half. A squadron that talks in numbers and forbids adjectives makes it physically hard to say the wrong thing. If you do not have a bearing and a range, you do not have a transmission. The night respects this. Weather lies in 2 dialects, radar ghosts that invite you to chase noise, and short, nasty seas that throw the launch attitude off exactly when you need stillness. Wise crews widen the fan a hair to buy insurance, accepting modestly lower probability of hit for meaningfully higher probability of survival and re-attack. Live cheap, die rich is bad doctrine for speedboats. Live to fire again is correct. Recovery drills exist because no plan survives a panic searchlight. A brisk smoke lay works as a shield, only if you slide along its edge. Bury yourself inside and you blind the helm you are counting on. The hard cross of the T is a sleight of hand in white water. Draw an escort into an overshoot by cutting across his bow at a distance that forces his guns to traverse through their own dead zones. Depth deception is almost comical in its simplicity. Carve a big S in your wake, then run straight on a dark lane parallel to your own foam while the enemy shoots at letters. Failure also hides in maintenance you postponed, and the sea is a perfect auditor. The plug you meant to swap but didn't will cough at the launch hump when you need smooth power. The belt you promised to replace after this one will choose the exact second the searchlight blinks on to announce its independence. Fast shot doctrine is allergic to after this one. It wants before the next one, always, because seconds behave better for boats that paid their debts in the afternoon. The engineering chief who carries a private list of unacceptable noises is not a caricature, he is a survival factor. When he says a magneto sounds like it wants to be someone else, the right answer is not a joke. The right answer is a swap. The post-mortem is where failure becomes capital. Crews who treat after-action notes as literature get worse. Crews who treat them like an invoice get better. The invoice has line items. Launch attitude sloppy by 1 degree. Arming distance shaved under pressure never again. Ready 2. Call late by 1 count. Engineer failed to breathe the center throttle at the top of the second swell. Net discipline decayed under excitement, reinforced brevity. Skipper narrated while exiting, no narration until safe. Each line becomes a checklist item, and checklists become culture. And culture is what answers for you when your heartbeat is doing arithmetic you can't. There is also the failure no one names until a figure in a wardroom does, and then everyone exhales. Fear turned into superstition instead of procedure. A scratched goggle lens became a talisman instead of a maintenance note. A lucky lever throw became a ritual instead of a redundant check. Professionals are gentle with myths and ruthless with procedures. They allow men the small comforts of habit, then quietly ensure the habits are chained to real actions that save lives. The doctrine forgives nerves. It does not forgive replacing math with magic. Failure is tuition. You can squander it on excuses or invest it in muscle memory. Fast-shot culture chooses the latter and earns compound interest. In nights that look like luck from shore and like repayment from the cockpit, the ledger settles either way. You get to choose whether it closes in your favor by turning every unpleasant line into a change someone can touch. Explosives break hulls. Speed breaks minds. The PT's most enduring gift wasn't just a fan laid across a lane, but a rumor laid across a fleet. They don't slow down. Rumor outruns steel. Inside the boat, the psychology that makes rumor real looks like calm aggression. Crews who thrive at 40 knots live on the narrow line between alert and agitated and hold their balance with ritual. They speak numbers instead of adjectives because numbers shrink fear. They run checklists until boredom arrives, then trust boredom as a friend who will come back at mark and lend steadiness to hands. They breathe on cue. They let discipline manufacture courage as a byproduct. Heroes, the loud kind, are dangerous to their friends. Professionals, the quiet kind, are dangerous to their enemies. The skipper's voice is climate control in a small hull. A calm mark is not acting, it is a tool. Shouting steals fine motor skills and taxes attention that ought to be spent on angles and seconds. The best skippers sound bored at the exact instant fear wants to speak. Boredom tells the amygdala to sit down. You can measure leadership inside a PT by the number of unnecessary words spoken inside the envelope. Fewer words, better hands. Better hands, straighter wakes, cleaner entries. It's a chain of custody for composure. Across the horizon, the convoy fights a different psychological war. A handful of clean nights produce a cultural tremor. Watch officers start to see boats in every whitecap. Gunners walk tracers at wakes because last time there was something there. Signalmen hesitate a half heartbeat before snapping on a light because shame lingers from the last light that helped the attacker more than the defense. Each false positive erodes morale. Each late course change that intersects the wrong slat teaches helplessness. Men cannot lead decisively when their premise is, "We are late by design." The PT wants them to learn that premise in their bones. That's why speed is more than movement. It is pedagogy. Searchlight shame is real. So is gunner's guilt. You can hear it in the way crews talk after a bad night. Words like exposed, blinded, wasted. Those words do not stay in one ship. They migrate through a formation like weather. The next time, a hand hovers over the switch a moment too long. The next time, a barrel holds fire in search of confirmatory drama that never comes. Both hesitations hand seconds to the attacker. Rumor inflates capability at the speed of human storytelling. The truth PTs can launch at speed mutates in enemy wardrooms into myths about homing fish and angle-agnostic releases. Escorts and fuel are allocated to fight ghosts. That misallocation is worth as much as a hit. It is a quiet victory that produces louder ones later. Meanwhile, the PTs manage their own fear by turning it into weather. Weather is acknowledged, layered for, and endured without committee debate. The convoy's fear becomes policy performed at sea by people who would rather be ashore, and policy is slow. PT culture turns anxiety into preparation and adrenaline into ritual. They sharpen goggles because they can. They clean contacts because they can. They count out loud because it works. Fear starved of superstition and fed on action shrinks to size. Fatigue is the tax everyone pays, but the ledger is uneven. PT crews spend discipline in short, intense bursts and sleep in the margins. Convoys spend vigilance for hours and then must be perfect for seconds. Humans invert that curve badly. One side pays daily, the other pays nightly at a discount. Defensive boredom is corrosive. It leads to shortcuts, to chatter, to the little sins of inattention that a 40-knot hull writes into. History with a single fan. Offensive boredom is rehearsal. It makes counting automatic, throttle breaths instinctive, lever throws inevitable. Two kinds of boredom, two kinds of nights. Courage is plentiful among defenders. Composure is rarer. Courage without composure is a gift to a 40-knot thief. Composure without courage would be paralysis. Composure braided with discipline is predation. That is why the PT's rumor works so well. It says to the opponent, "Your best moment will come after our most important action." And if a sailor believes that sentence, he begins to conserve initiative rather than spend it. Conserved initiative turns into a kind of strategic anemia. You cannot win nights with saving throws, you win them with moves. The PT's psychology denies you the move. This isn't gloating, it is diagnosis. A navy that expects to own the dark through optics and pedigree must relearn the night when seconds become the primary terrain. A small, fast, disciplined hull does not just damage ships, it damages certainty. Once certainty takes damage, doctrine must heal it, and doctrine heals slowly. While it heals, rumor does more work. The circle closes. Speed creates surprise. Surprise becomes rumor. Rumor creates hesitation. Hesitation restores surprise. That is the weapon. We end where serious war stories should end, with ledgers, contrasts, and a moral squint that refuses to turn arithmetic into mythology. The record of fast shots reads cleanest when you present modest ratios honestly rather than trumpet heroic tallies. Sorties become fans laid. Fans become intercept opportunities. Opportunities become effects, boils in water, secondary fires, a ship-breaking station and throwing a convoy into a geometry it did not rehearse. Tempo becomes a statistic. Maintenance hours per sortie, average time to swap a magneto or a rack, the percentage of missions delayed or scrubbed by technical faults. Fuel becomes permission quantified. Gallons burned per hour. At 40 knots against transit burn, the average margin on return, the number of nights doctrine could afford because drums arrived on time. The power sits in the shape of the numbers, not in any single boast. You can say, without lying and without bragging, that for every handful of fans laid, some produced a real intercept opportunity, fewer produced a confirmed effect, and enough produced uncertainty that the enemy changed behavior. Change is victory, measured across weeks. A single graphic tells the thesis to anyone who does not love boats. Put 90 seconds on one side and the convoy reaction cycle on the other. On the attack side, the line is short and hard. Detect, align, release, exit. On the defense side, the line is longer and softer. Detect, illuminate, coordinate, maneuver. Under each verb, small, honest annotations show the human lags the 2 or 3 seconds eyes need to make sense of a vague shape, the 5 or 10 seconds a watch officer needs to decide whether to burn his crew's night vision, the 10 to 20 seconds required for orders to travel voice to hand, the 20 to 30 before a big mass of steel actually begins to answer the helm. You are not inventing numbers, you are naming the species of delay that live in human systems. Once an audience sees those delays, the 40-knot shot stops looking like audacity and starts looking like engineering applied to time. Doctrine leaves residue wherever it goes. After nights like these, enemy SOPs change. Escorts stretch their cones outward to catch the mosquito sooner, and by doing so, open seams elsewhere. Searchlight doctrine tightens to protect night vision, and by doing so, shrinks illumination windows to moments too small for committee action. Convoy spacing widens to avoid collision in panic turns, and by doing so, lengthens formations that are harder to protect end to end. Every fix writes a new vulnerability. That is the quiet legacy of a boat that treated seconds as material. The quieted enemy spends months redistributing risk around problems you created in minutes. None of this exists without parts in boxes and gasoline in drums. The photo essay that should accompany your closing is not an explosion, it is a warehouse. Crates stacked like patient promises, stencils that smell of solvent, men in coveralls who never rode awake at night and nonetheless aimed 100 hits by making sure the right magneto was on the right shelf on a Tuesday. Put that image beside a night wake photo and say aloud, this is the same weapon from two angles. It is hard to romanticize a parts bin. That is why you must. If you cannot love the cardboard and the stencil as much as the spray and the tracer, you do not yet understand why the wooden killer worked. The uncomfortable arithmetic must stand with equal clarity. A torpedo fan does not know cargo from conscripts. Panic turns break ships across reefs as effectively as explosives do. Survivors in black water do not care about doctrine. The only mitigation within a crew's reach is professionalism carried to the point of self-denial. Fans narrower than ego would prefer, launches later than impatience would like, exits that avoid drawing defensive fire across the herd. Speed made choices simple. It did not make them clean. This is the sentence the script must earn. If you cannot say it, you should not celebrate the rest. What endures is not a particular hull or engine, but the idea you can carry forward to other wars and other tools. Compress the opponent's decision cycle below human comfort and make your own cycle repeatable at that speed. Aircraft do it with sensors, drones with circuits, software with packets. The wooden hull taught the lesson first. Seconds are a currency. Spend them like you know their price. Close, and it is night again. Quiet again. A boat rides the black as if it belongs there. You point the bow, count out loud, and promise to keep the fan as small as it can be and still work. That, promise craft over cruelty, is the only legacy worth bragging about. And if there is any redemption available in such work, it lies in how seriously you treat that promise when no one is watching. A hand checking a safety pin in darkness, a voice counting because counting steadies other voices. A skipper refusing the pretty exit because the planned one is safer for strangers he will never meet. The ledger ends where it began, with seconds and their uses. The men who rowed these boats harvested seconds and built structures inside them, envelopes, corridors, fans, exits. Their opponents, brave and competent, tried to buy seconds with light, with noise, with will, and discovered that courage does not shorten biology. That is not a moral, it is a limit. The moral is what you do with knowledge of the limit. A professional narrows his fan, holds his shot, and leaves when he should. An amateur tells a story. The history that mattered happened in quiet voices over gasoline and salt, numbers, not adjectives, and a vow to keep the arithmetic honest.